Walk into any bookstore today, and you are immediately greeted by walls of neon pastels and sprayed edges. We are living in an era dominated by cozy fantasies, formulaic romantasy, and endless loops of predictable comfort fiction. Let's call it what it is: a modern opiate. There's nothing inherently wrong with entertainment, but when an entire culture's literary landscape shifts exclusively towards escape, it means something has gone deeply wrong with how we view the printed word. Books are no longer being written to make us look at the world. They are being written to help us hide from it. They provide a warm, synthetic aesthetic that puts the conscious mind to sleep. But true literature, the kind that echoes across centuries, was never meant to be a sedative. It was designed to be a weapon, a light. Historically, writing, journalism, and fiction had a dangerous, sharp purpose: to inform, to strip away comfortable delusions, and to challenge the status quo. True art is a mirror held up to systemic rot, and a mirror is an incredibly terrifying thing to people who profit from the darkness. You can easily identify the writers who mattered, because they didn't receive awards and comfortable book tours from the establishment. They received the ultimate stamp of systemic validation. Their states, their countries hated them, feared them, and used its full monopoly to try and shut them down. Let's look at our first historical proof: Victor Hugo. Today, mainstream society knows him through musical theater adaptations, sanitizing his legacy into a tragic historical drama. But in the 19th century, Victor Hugo's pen was a direct threat to the imperial crown. Hugo wasn't just a novelist. He was an intellectual force inside the French Parliament who bore witness to the horrific systemic abandonment of the working class. When Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon III, executed a bloody coup d'etat in 1851 to establish an authoritarian empire, Hugo did not bend the knee. He publicly branded the new ruler a traitor, a usurper, and a tyrant in his scathing political pamphlet, Napoleon le Petit, or Napoleon the Small. The state's reaction was instantaneous. Hugo had to flee Paris under a false passport to avoid a firing squad or a deep dungeon. He entered the agonizing, bitter exile that would drag on for 19 long years. Living on the isolated, storm-swept Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, stripped of his homeland, Hugo weaponized his isolation. It was during this grueling exile that he finished his masterpiece, Les Miserables. He wasn't writing a historical romance. He was laying bare the cold structural cruelty of the French legal system, the corruption of law enforcement embodied by Inspector Javert, and the absolute failure of institutional charity. The French government feared his words so profoundly that they banned the publication of his works within France. Yet, copies were smuggled across the borders like contraband. When Napoleon III offered an amnesty to political exiles in 1859, Hugo proudly refused, declaring, "I will share the exile of freedom to the end. When liberty returns, I will return." 19 years of displacement was the price he paid because his fiction refused to play nice with power. If Hugo proved that literature could challenge an emperor, our second example proved that a single man with a pencil could fracture a totalitarian superpower. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. In 1945, while serving as a decorated captain in the Soviet Red Army during World War II, Solzhenitsyn committed the ultimate crime in a closed society. He wrote a private letter to a friend containing a critical, sarcastic comment about Joseph Stalin. For the crime of written words, he was arrested by the NKVD, stripped of his rank, and sentenced to 8 brutal years in the forced labor camps of the Soviet Gulag system. The Soviet machine designed these camps to break human identity and erase dissent. Instead, the camps forged Solzhenitsyn's purpose. He memorized thousands of lines of prose while performing back-breaking labor in sub-zero temperatures, writing them down on tiny scraps of paper he hid inside his clothing or burned after committing to memory. When his short novel, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, was briefly published during a temporary political thaw in 1962, it sent shockwaves through the global landscape. For the first time, the raw, unvarnished terror of Stalin's camps was exposed to the common worker. The state quickly realized their mistake. The KGB placed him under constant surveillance, confiscated his manuscripts, and orchestrated a massive state-sponsored smear campaign to destroy his reputation. But Solzhenitsyn had already smuggled the microfilm of his magnus opus, the Gulag Archipelago, out of the country. When it was finished in the West in 1973, it fundamentally dismantled the intellectual credibility of Soviet communism worldwide. The state feared a trial would turn him into a global martyr, so in 1974, they stripped him of his citizenship, arrested him, and physically forced him on an airplane into permanent exile. Solzhenitsyn proved that a state can control the military, the police, and the borders, but that cannot control the mind that refuses to lie. Censorship and the fear of dangerous writing do not just belong to overt dictatorships or imperial regimes. They exist within Western democracies that claim to champion free speech. Whenever a writer dares to shatter the polite, sanitize boundaries of societal illusions. When James Joyce wrote Ulysses in the early 20th century, he wasn't trying to write a cozy parlor novel. He set out to capture the raw, unfiltered stream of consciousness reality of human existence, including our deepest flaws, our raw sensuality, and our secret unspoken hypocrisies. He refused to dress humanity up in the moralizing armor expected of the Edwardian establishment. The response from the polite world was a campaign of absolute legal and physical destruction. Before the book was even completed as a whole novel, its serialized chapters in the American journal, the Little Review, were seized by the United States Post Office and publicly burned. In 1921, the publishers were brought to trial in New York and officially convicted of publishing obscenity. Ulysses was effectively banned across the entire English-speaking world for over a decade. Custom officials in the UK and America raided luggage, confiscated copies like illegal narcotics, and incinerated them in government furnaces. Why did the legal system of the free world treat an experimental literary novel like a hazardous bioweapon? Because Joyce's prose stripped away the moral prestige of the church, the state, and the traditional family structure. He showed that beneath the clean, pressed suits of respectable society lay a chaotic world of gray morals and primal instincts. Joyce forced the West to look at its own unvarnished reflection, and the establishment's immediate reaction was to burn the glass. The tradition of writing against the grain didn't stop with historical exiles. It continued into the 20th century with authors who refused to validate the conforming myths of Western civilization. Take Cormac McCarthy. While mainstream fiction spent decades romanticizing the American West as a noble frontier of progress and manifest destiny, McCarthy gave the world Blood Meridian. He shadowed the American mythos entirely, presenting a landscape of absolute moral void, systematic slaughter, and a terrifyingly eternal antagonist in Judge Holden, who proclaims that war is good. McCarthy's social message was an uncompromising assault on the illusion of human advancement. He forced readers to confront the primordial, blood-soaked foundations of institutional expansion, writing a slow-burn nightmare that modern corporate algorithms would flag as too dark for polite consumption. And right along McCarthy stands Vladimir Nabokov, a writer who weaponized pure prose style to execute a profound psychological ambush on societal complacency. With Lolita, Nabokov didn't write an erotic romance. He constructed an uncomfortable masterpiece of subversion. By trapping the reader inside the beautiful, glittering, and highly manipulative stream of consciousness of a literal monster, Humbert, Nabokov exposed the ultimate hypocrisy of a pristine, post-war middle class. The novel was banned in the United Kingdom, France, and Argentina because it refused to give society a simple, black-and-white moral escape hatch. Nabokov proved that true literature doesn't exist to make you comfortable within your own morality. It exists to test the limits of your psychological boundaries. Hugo, Solzhenitsyn, Joyce, and McCarthy, and Nabokov teach us a vital lesson. If your writing doesn't carry a risk of alienating people, it probably isn't saying anything of substance. True literature must be an act of defiance. When I sat down to draft my novel, The Devil in the Blue, I knew I was rejecting the comfortable, fast-paced commercial templates that the modern online algorithms crave. I intentionally built a slow-burn, atmospheric neo-noir world set against the synthetic neon backdrop of Las Vegas. I knew from day one that this book would court controversy and challenge deep-seated comfort zones. I don't want any spoilers, and of course I'm not comparing myself to the greats. But I can say my novel was born from a social need to highlight the dangers of excess government authority, but also more prosaic issues such as the war on beauty. I know many readers looking for a simple escapist freebie or a predictable cozy thriller would stumble over these gray morals and structural shifts. But I didn't write this book as an opiate. I wrote it to challenge, to inform, and to drop readers headfirst into a world where characters are forced to navigate the agonizing friction of moral survival. Thank you for your time in watching this presentation. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and of course, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for your time.